Well, thank you very much, Rupert, for that wonderful introduction. It can only go downhill from here. And thanks to CUP for having me and for inviting me to speak at this great conference. I imagine that after 2.5 days of keynotes and sessions and talks, you're looking forward to a bit of a charismatic, uplifting, humorous performance to, leave you going home on a high. Yeah? Whoops. I'm going to be quite serious in the next 45 minutes. So not really a charismatic performance from me. So if you were expecting that, can I say sorry and bear with me? Because I think I have sound and compelling reasons why I want to be serious about the topic of my talk. Why it's important for us leaders to really, really think deeply about continuous professional development. This is something that I mentioned back in 2016, and then Vic Richardson mentioned in 2017. In a minute, I'm going to show you the findings of a meta-research study conducted by Vivian Robertson about what are the most impactful dimensions of leadership of learning. In other words, what are the key ingredients, if you like, of leadership that make an impact on learners and their learning? I'm going to show them to you in alphabetical order. So what I'd like you to do is to read them and order them in the order that you think are the most impactful interventions that a leader can make. Okay? So from alphabetical order to order of impact. There you go. Here are the findings. Okay. In order from the least important to the most important. And the most impactful dimension of leadership of learning is promoting and participating in teacher learning and development, which means that I, as a leader, am directly involved in supporting it, but also in promoting it and in being there and doing it and getting dirty with it. And actually, if you look at the numbers, it has twice the impact as the next most impactful activity. So if you think about the things that you do and the time that you devote to your leadership activities, this should be really important. The way you think about it, the way you support CPD, the way you approach it. So this is the plan for my talk. So first, I want to look at why we need to be very knowledgeable and informed and inform our CPD programs by looking at the evidence. And notice the word I used, evidence-informed, and I wasn't at Phil's talk, so I'm quite pleased. I heard that he talked a bit about this. Then we're going to be talking about the features of CPD according to research. And by research, I mean a number of meta-analyses. So I'm talking about robust research. And funnily enough, it's fascinating that when you look at every meta-analysis, they coincide, which is rather bizarre in research, that every single finding points in the same direction. So I think it's important to at least know more about this. And then what practical implications for the continuous professional development design could be for my organization. Okay, so let's start with evidence-informed CPD for teachers. Now, as Rupert said before, I'm the head of teacher development in my organization. So for me, I'm very, very aware that CPD programs require a significant investment of time, resources, and commitment from teachers, from managers, from the teachers' families, from the CPD providers, from everybody. So I really don't want to waste the time, the money, the resources, the effort, the motivation on interventions, approaches, strategies that I have absolutely no evidence that they work. I don't want to be working at the fringes. I want to know that whatever my teachers are working on in their learning makes an impact. Related to that, we now know better than ever before that not all CPD initiatives are equally effective. As Thomas Gaski puts it very eloquently, a lot of good things are done in the name of professional development, but so are a lot of rotten things. There's the quality of CPD provision, the quality of CPD materials is very mixed and very varied. So again, I want to make sure that my teachers, the teachers in my organization, have the best quality available of professional development. And that's why I look at the evidence. And finally, that not all continuous professional development materials are reliable. And let's think of, the massive availability there is now with Web 2.0 and all the sort of massive developments in technology. It's great in the sense that now we have lots of access to free resources, easy to download, at the flip of at the fingertips. Wonderful. However, we can't say that everything that teachers download and have access to is of high quality. And part of the problem is that, for example, if you think of blogs and etc., they do not have the rigor and the robustness of a publishing process, editorial processes, etc. So a lot of the time, again, not everything, yes, there is a lot, and that's great, but not everything is good. I want to make sure that my teachers have access to the best possible materials. And that's why, again, we look at the evidence and we focus on the evidence. So, let's focus on the evidence. What does research, all the meta-analysis in terms of looking at what CPD activities actually make a difference? That's what we're looking at. And not just to the teachers, but more importantly, to their learners. And they have a number of features in their design. And this, as a leader of learning, I need to know a lot about. You have access now. You've got a copy of this white paper that I co-wrote with Gabriel Diaz-Marjoli. And it's there. The evidence is there. And it's free to download if you want electronic copies from the Better Learning website. And I'm going to summarize the white paper in terms of the findings. Now, to make it easy to remember, we grouped the features, the effective features of design of CPD into the letters of the word inspire. So, first I'm going to name what those features are, and then I'm going to unpick them and unpack them for you. So, I stands for impactful. N for needs-based. S for sustained. P for peer collaborative. I for in practice. R for reflective. And E for evaluated. Let's begin at the beginning with impactful. Now, what does this actually mean? As a leader of learning, for me, the main goal of CPD is to help teachers make changes in their teaching, not just because it's interesting and it helps their motivation and their engagement and it prevents high turnover of staff, but mainly so that learning, that teacher learning, results in better learning for their learners. So I don't just focus on anything that's interesting or the latest fad, but we focus on those strategies that we know there is evidence that they improve learning. And this is underpinned by, again, the finding that if you develop the teacher's ability to teach well, that makes not just a little difference, a significant difference to learners' progress and leads to better learning outcomes. And actually, it disproportionately benefits weaker learners, so it benefits them even more. So, if you want to focus on impact as a leader of learning, there is a fundamental question that you and I need to ask ourselves as we plan and make decisions about CPD and CPD provision. What types of continuous professional development programs result in better learning, not just for the teachers in my organization, but more importantly, or equally importantly, for the learners? So the learner's learning is the starting point of the planning. And from there, the teacher's learning. So, how does that happen? How do we make it happen as leaders? And again, the research suggests the following. First of all, as a leader of CPD, it's really important that I create, I communicate, and share so that everybody buys into an inspirational vision. A vision of, it's not just possible that students can learn even better, it's really desirable. And in this organization, we're all really invested in this, in making really the best possible experiences for our learners. Now, after the vision, it's all about understanding, all of us in the organization, all of us, what changes do we need to achieve in teaching, in learning, etc., to drive that improvement? And what strategies actually have a good understanding of those strategies that drive that improvement. So, in terms of strategies for teaching that improve learning outcomes, what are they? What's the evidence? Will it work in my organization? Which means setting together clear objectives. I say together because without teachers' buy-in, I'm not going anywhere. So together, after setting that vision and creating that sense of urgency and importance that this is somewhere where we want to go together, we create objectives for teacher learning linked to, again, improve student learning. And those dialogues that my managers have in the organization, they're all about, okay, well, teacher says, I want to work on this and I want to work on that. And the constant question is, and how's that going to improve your learners' learning? Then we plan CPD for teachers to learn those strategies. Then the teachers implement the new strategies. And of course, this is evaluation happens, through objective setting, learning, implementation. We evaluate those objectives, we evaluate the implementation, we evaluate the learning of the teachers, we evaluate the learning of the learners to make sure that we are going in the right direction. And if we're not, well, what else do we need to do? Let's now move on to needs-based. And I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on this one because there are so many dimensions to it. Now, the first thing, I'm going to say two things mainly about CPD that is based on needs. A, that it needs to be differentiated. And B, that it needs to be relevant. So I'm going to spend a bit of time on both. The most obvious thing that all of us know about the need for differentiated continuous professional development for teachers is, we've said this a number of times, that each teacher has got different needs. And if we just look at some of the examples in terms of, how teachers are different in the courses, the types of courses that they teach, the types of experiences that they have, whether they teach face-to-face or online or blended, etc., etc., etc. The famous old reminder that one size does not fit all. In terms of relevance, this is very important. By relevance, we mean that at every stage of the way, we make it related to their learners. So, the content of the CPD programs needs to constantly go back and relate to the teachers' classrooms and helping them think about the students' learning and how they're going to implement this and how is it going to impact on the students and why might they need this and why they might not need that, etc. And we link this to their own areas for development, but again, beginning from the learner. Let me give you an example from my own organization in terms of how we differentiated materials for teacher learning. We created our own online learning zone with different sites for different course types in our different business streams. So, for example, we have an adult LMS for teachers of adult learners. We've got a different one for teachers of university foundation programs. These are subject teachers who teach through the medium of English. So it's a completely different set of skills, etc. And for young learner teachers. So just to give you a flavor of how the topics are different and what they need to learn is completely different. So adult teachers, we've been doing a lot of work on assessment for learning, but also on differentiation of adult learners. In university foundation programs, you know, these subject teachers tend to lecture a lot. So we needed to focus more on how to present information in meaningful chunks, how to make it active and interactive for their learners, increasing the questioning, increasing the giving and the eliciting of feedback, working more in pairs and with groups, breaking that 50-minute lecture into interactivity. What language support do they need to give their learners? Because subject teachers think a lot about the subjects and the language of their discipline, but they don't think about the other language, the linguistic demands that the assessments and the topics make. So a completely different set of skills, really, and topics. Young learners, well, it's all about, we work with projects a lot, project-based learning, so it's all about the life of a project, project outcomes and guiding questions and teachers thinking about, you know, how do we enable that project to get to fruition, etc., etc. Now, you may think that this is not something you want to do. You spend your time and money and resources, and actually Cambridge CUP has got its own LMS, and you can actually have differentiated materials and access to them. But the importance is the principle of, you know, one size doesn't fit all, which is kind of obvious. The other thing we've done in our LMS is we have actually used the terms from the Cambridge English language framework that divides, if you like, teachers into their developmental stages. So we divided our materials into foundation, developing, and proficient expert to make sure that teachers knew and at what types of experience their materials were appropriate or not. The other thing we do, we have weekly inset sessions. We haven't stopped those. But what we've done is we've added choice. So rather than have one session for everybody, you know, trainer, teacher who finished her initial teacher education course last week, which is not appropriate, we have electives. So at certain points, teachers have the chance to actually choose, and they have an input into their choice. So, for example, these are two examples of sessions we've done as electives. So, for example, a session on listening as decoding, the latest research and implications for teaching, and another one, a very practical workshop on developing our students' reading fluency. So teachers can choose according to what they know, want to know, need to know is important for their learners. But we also target specific development for different types of teachers. So in our organization, for example, we've got IELTS teachers, we've got teacher trainers, we've got trainers. So IELTS standardization for teachers of IELTS. We've done a session lately on comparing approaches to supervision of trainers for those very experienced trainers. We have a series of sessions on coaching and mentoring teachers with very practical role plays, etc., for academic managers and teacher trainers. So we cater for those learning needs that are very, very different as part of our CPD program. And of course, a fundamental aspect of needs-based is also taking into account teachers' wants, what they think and feel they need to learn. And there's a strand in our CPD program where we engage in teacher research. And this is where the teachers are at the total driving seat of their professional development. And they choose what they want to focus on, how they want to approach it, etc. For the last few years, we have been experimenting with two approaches, action research and supported experiments. And we have doubled in lesson study, but we are piloting it in more depth this year, at the end of the year. That's a third strand. So teachers actually, it's not just that they choose the topic, but they also choose the approach. Let me give you an example where I can tell you together how we worked with relevance and differentiation. We recently adopted a new LMS for our learners. Bell Online. So we decided to really plan it in a way that listened to the evidence. So the relevance is that, again, and that relationship with learners is that the starting point of our teaching of the teachers who needed to learn how to use the LMS to work with their learners wasn't just how does the LMS work. So session 1, this is this functionality, session 2, this is that functionality, session 3, and it's all about the LMS. But what we've done is we focused on what teachers, well, first what students and then what teachers need to know to use the LMS actively and autonomously. So the way we presented and packaged the teaching and learning was in terms of what the students needed to do. So, for example, the students and the teachers needed to track the students' progress. So that was the session, tracking student progress, using the dashboard in this particular case, just to give you an example. How we did it, for every session, this ran over for 8 weeks. I'm fascinated when people train people to use the LMS in one session. I just want to know the recipe. Over 8 weeks we spent with the teachers. And in every one of those weeks, we had 2 concurrent simultaneous setups so that teachers could choose. So setup 1 was step-by-step show and tell practice. This was for teachers who lack confidence and who like being led by the hand. The other setup was a guided exploration with tasks and resources. This is for the ones that they're more confident and like the sort of in at the deep end. Leave me alone. I'll work it out. And teachers had the possibility of swapping every week if they wanted to. So, enough about differentiated and relevant. The other aspect that's really very important as a leader of CPD to think about very carefully is the contextual relevance of those research findings. And normally, a lot of CPD is planned on the basis of what teachers need. And if we're lucky, some CPD is planned on the basis of what the learners need. Now, there are other dimensions of context that we don't usually pay attention to, and I think are fundamental, and is the sort of sink or swim of your approach. Let's have a look at the dimensions, and I'll unpick and unpack them each. Okay, so photos, and then I'll get on. So let's begin with the global context. I'll try and explain this by giving an example for each dimension. So first of all, of course, there are global phenomena that have a massive impact on my students and their learning. Example, technological disruption. Now, this is a quote from a recent report produced by the British Council last April called Future Demand for English in Europe. I have to say it's more relevant than just Europe. That's why I brought it within the global context. And it says, I'm going to read because I don't want to quote inaccurately. The most potentially disruptive and transformational developments that might affect the English teaching market by 2025 are those technologies that can be developed to deliver some of the wider consumer trends and demands. And this is the important bit. What are the demands? And it says, English learners want flexible, personalized, purpose-specific, and time-effective English language learning within a smooth, personalized customer journey. My question is, when I look at this, in my staff rooms across the organization, what kind of teacher can deliver this type of learning? How experienced, how expert, how sophisticated do they have to be able to deliver this? And if you are familiar with the Cambridge English Teaching Framework, can I invite you to think about at what development phases they might need to be able to deliver this? In addition to the obvious technological competencies in terms of digital literacies, etc., that teachers need to develop so that they can develop them in their learners. Let's not even think about that. I looked at the possibly connected descriptors in the Cambridge English Teaching Framework. Now listen to Foundation. Can plan and deliver simple lessons with a basic awareness of learners' need. Does that do the trick? for that? I don't think so. A developing teacher, listen to the language, some awareness of learners' need. I don't think so. I think to be able to teach the learner of the future, we're talking about proficient and expert territory. Now think of your staff room and their skills and their expertise and their experience. And for me, again, some other questions that I keep thinking. Do initial teacher training courses adequately prepare teachers to deliver this in 4 weeks? The answer is no, it can't. We can't, ask it to deliver. So if the initial teacher education course doesn't do it, then we need to do it. Are the staff in my school, these are questions for you and for me, are the staff in my schools equipped to deliver this type of learning experience? If not yet, what competencies will they need to acquire to be able to offer this kind of experience? But for me, fundamentally, as a leader of CPD, I need to think about how can I, maybe I can't, but if so, how can I accelerate the learner of my foundation teachers and my developing teachers so that they get there as soon as we possibly can? Because they need, they need to raise a game in terms of expertise. So enough about the global context. Now let's look at the educational, socio-political, and cultural. We tend to ignore these things at our peril. So let me give you an example of how this is important. Educational context. In May, in Strasbourg, there was the launch of the revisions to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. Are we thinking about this? What impact will the rollout of the revisions have on syllabus design, on assessment, on learning materials, on materials for teacher learning, on teacher development frameworks, on initial teacher education programs and continuous professional development programs? Are we thinking about this? How is my organization preparing teachers for this? This is just an example of ignore context at your peril. Institutional needs and culture. This is fundamental. Having a conducive culture that is in, it's got harmony with the CPD program that you want to develop. Let me give you an example of trying to introduce a new CPD approach. So imagine you want to introduce a new approach to your organization. You heard a lot about teacher research and how important it is and what the evidence says, so you want to drive it in your organization. Now, teacher research basically works on a number of assumptions. A, that the teachers themselves choose the focus of the research, they choose the methods, they choose the topic, and that they're capable of managing the project and the timelines. And the expectation is that throughout, the teachers have to have initiative and agency. They're the protagonists of it. They drive it. So in a way, we need a teacher as driver. But what if the culture of my organization is a top-down, done-to culture of inset, where basically what they have experienced up until now is topic and focus of the CPD program decided for the teachers, not by the teachers, but for the teachers, and is taught by others, the experts, the trainer of the publishing house, the parachutist, one-off trainer. And the only expectation I have is that the teachers are actually sitting there, that they come, because some can't come. In other words, the culture in my organization is teacher as passenger. Now, what's going to happen here is a massive disconnect. And implementing this approach in this context is a recipe for failure. So what we want is to first gradually change the culture. And you do it, as we said before, through leadership, creating a vision, getting the buy-in, thinking together, etc., etc. Until you get that right, don't change your approach. So, this is an example of my organization. We worked very hard for a long time to create an enabling culture. And what we've got is something called the Bellway, which is a set of evidence-informed principles. I'm not going to bore you with the detail, but there's one principle that's called organizational learning. And the objective is not that this is just on a piece of paper, but this is what, hopefully, if I invite you to my organization, you tell me I can see it. I can breathe it. We continuously refresh and renew our professional skills in order to support effective learning and teaching. And this is what it actually means, that the learning that takes place within our organization has a significant impact on the quality and success of our students and their learning. And this is not just words. This drives everything. It drives, for example, our observation criteria, the comments that we give teachers. It's not about, for example, I don't know, your board work needs to be better. Why? I'm not saying it needs to be worse, but what is the impact on learners and their learning? All our staff, and in particular our teachers, of course all of us, but in particular them because they're at the chalk phase, need continuing professional development to achieve Bell's common vision. Our policy decisions are coherent with this, and we mean this. So for every hour that teachers get paid for teaching, they always get paid an extra 30 minutes so that they can attend CPD. We can't force teachers to come. If we're serious about enabling, then we need to put our money literally where our mouth is. Conditions, what's feasible? Let's go back to the new approach. This is fundamental. What can we do in our context? And what can't we do in our context? So, back into that example of teacher research. Now, what teacher research means is that teachers need to read the literature, plan a research question, think of data collection, experiment with the new approach, evaluate the new approach, design new materials and evaluation tools, analyze and interpret the data, and prepare to share the findings. Now, what if, in my context, the teachers work full-time and on top of that, they need to work extra hours on a 0-hour contract to make ends meet? Because if not enough money to feed the children. And they, of course, have no release time because they must work on the project in their own time. I'm not paying for them. Now, again, another serious disconnect. This approach, in this context, is not feasible. So I either change the conditions of my context or I don't bother. It's going to fail. So the key question here is, and this is the evidence-informed part, the judicious use of evidence with my knowledge of context. What works, not just what works, that's the question of evidence-based. The question of evidence-informed practice is what works in this context for these learners, for these teachers, and these leaders at this point in time with these resources and these constraints. Moving on quickly to sustained. Now, sustained has got two dimensions. One is support. We sustain as in we hold teachers throughout the changes, throughout the painful process of change. We all say we love change, but teaching is a very conservative profession. It's all about, here I am, I'm the expert. So, bear that in mind. Change hurts, and teachers don't always like change. They say they like it, but they don't, sometimes. So, continued support through the pain, from input, from the moment I teach them a new approach, to the moment they use it with their learners. But also that is sustained over time. It's prolonged. Sustained in terms of support. The one-off doesn't work. I'm going to say that again in a minute. It doesn't work. We need to consolidate. We need to follow up. We need to support activities so that what they learn in the CPD program finds its way into their classroom. You only achieve that through sustaining and supporting and following up. So what we actually do need are frequent and repeated opportunities for teachers to encounter the same topics, understand them deeply, respond to them and reflect to them critically, and think about their classrooms and how and whether it works or not. As David Weston says very eloquently, Saying that an inset session or a conference is a great professional development, it's like saying that a shopping trip is a good meal. It's what you do with it, what you bring back, that counts. So it's not the input, it's the support. Of course, input is the beginning, and it is important, but it's what teachers do with it, and what, as a leader, do to help them. The research consistently says that teachers need teacher learning activities consistent with what, so that if you like, the delivery of that input is consistent with what I'm teaching. They need to see models. They need modeling of new strategies. They need to be able to discuss how to transfer what they're learning to their own classrooms. They need to think it through, talk it through. They need to experiment with those strategies, and they need to analyze and critically reflect on those strategies. Most CPD ends there, if we're lucky. So, none of this. So this is why there's always a gap, or when there is a gap between what we teach in the CPD program and what the teachers actually do in the classroom. The support isn't there. Prolonged, very basic, and every single research report that you read says the same, that teachers need considerable time to learn new strategies in sufficient depth, to apply them confidently and effectively in the classroom, and to embed them systematically. Time. At least, they say, 6 months with one topic. So one-off sessions and short courses are not effective in creating the necessary conditions. Are they effective in raising awareness? Yes. Are they effective in the teachers actually transferring that awareness? No. That's a difference. If we want impact on learning, it's got to get to transferability. So very quickly, in 1 minute, can I ask you to discuss with the people sitting next to you, how can or has your organization, or will, or whether, your organization moved away from one-off events or short disconnected inset sessions as the main approach to CPD? So, some small steps, baby steps that you can take. 1, create a long-term plan rather than piecemeal. This week I'm doing this, and next week I don't know, I'll plan next week. Long-term plan. Of course it will change. Of course it's not the territory, but I have a great idea. Focus on deep learning and transferability. So fewer topics, but more time spent on each topic with more activities and thematic threads around the year, across the year. So, for example, in 1 year at Bell, the focus was assessment for learning, and we stayed with it the whole year. There's so much to learn about assessment for learning. Another suggestion, structure time differently. So if you're into the one-day event, break it down into a number of shorter sessions spread over the year, either face-to-face or online. But that gives you the time for people to go off, implement, come back, think about it, share what they've learned, what the issues were, etc., etc. And in the middle, set implementation and evaluation tasks for people to think and for you to support them in their implementation. And if you can, offer support and coaching for teachers throughout the difficulties of the implementation process. A buddy, a sounding board. So, again, our new LMS, how did we focus on transferability? So we did short and focused input with in-session practice. So little input, lots of practice. Little input, lots of practice. Then after the session, we did what we called SAMPIT, implement. So throughout that week, the teachers would implement the little input into a mock site. Then we gathered issues and questions, and that's where the peer collaboration kicked in the following week. The continued support, what happened? For teachers, we've got advanced practitioners, so good, very excellent, outstanding practitioners, teachers and teacher trainers who were doing the teaching. But also we had digital champions, so really good users of technology, supporting, being teaching assistants, and online forums for teachers to record their issues, and then we could all explore them together. For the trainers delivering the training, we also build the support. So we gave those advanced practitioners doing the training, the help of the champions who were the first to experiment. So they were experimenting a week in advance. And they were telling the trainers what the issues were. And mind this, and I worked on that this way. But we also had critical friends. You know, the people who hate technology or the people who have great difficulty with technology to actually troubleshoot the training in advance. That was a master stroke because they stopped being critical in the sessions. They felt valued and they had good skills to share their criticality. And it meant that the sessions were better. So prolonged, in this case, it was over 8 weeks. And now let's move very swiftly to peer collaborative. Now, the research says that, it doesn't say that peer collaboration, it says that effective peer collaboration is among the highest indicators of effectiveness in CPD. So it's not any peer collaboration. It's not just work together and I go away. It's not that. Effective peer collaboration involves teachers in solving problems or refining approaches together. So, for example, things like joint planning in pairs or in small groups who teach the same level or the same course type. Team teaching followed by joint evaluation. This is a big lesson study. Peer observation followed by discussion. So thinking together, evaluating together. I'm going to move swiftly because I'm in a bit of a rush now. In practice. Now, this means very easily that teachers learn through doing, through tackling real issues, and through developing practical solutions. So let's tie this up with reflective, because they come together. Now, what reflection means, and when reflection works, is when you've got cycles of action research or inquiry. In other words, when teachers investigate something, they study something, a strategy, a technique, then they implement it, then they evaluate it, and they refine it, and next cycle. So putting these two together is really very important. And I think there are two approaches that do this very well. And in our experience, they have done this for us. One, as I said, is action research. Now, action research is not just experimenting with something. It's not. It's a very refined approach. So we felt that we needed external support here. So we got it. We got our teachers to go into a scheme of action research run by Cambridge Assessment and English UK. And they had support over 8 months from Professor Simon Borg, an expert in action research. And then in-house, we did supported experiments, which is, if you like, a distant cousin of action research, is more manageable. And those teachers who feel daunted by action research feel they can manage supported experiments. So teachers can choose. They can either apply for action research externally, or they can do supported experiments internally. These are some examples of our teachers who were engaged in action research, speaking at the conferences about their findings, and then being published, which is great. You want to encourage people to be published authors. And this is very quickly the supported experiment cycle, where teachers basically look at their current practice, identify something that's not quite happy with this, it's not working very well, and then they explore what else is out there, what else could they be doing, what other solutions are there around, what does the evidence say? And then they plan the experiment, they carry it out, then they share the strategies with other teachers, and hopefully that is embedded in the practice of the organization. Here are some examples of supported experiments that teachers did in our organization. This is totally driven by them. We just give them the support through the advanced practitioners to talk and refine the questions, etc. Recommend reading. But this is their own ideas. And you can see again that how it addresses the different needs and wants of teachers. one of our teachers, again, presenting the results of her supported experiment and being published. And finally, evaluated. This is where we kind of all drop the ball. I don't know, maybe most of us. No, it's really very important to evaluate CPD and its impact. And going back to Guskey, a lot of things, good things are done in the name of professional development, but so are a lot of rotten things. He says that evaluation provides the key to making the distinction between good and rotten. In the white paper, you've got quite a bit of information about how to do it at different levels. But just let me show you some examples. Every week after the CPD session, every Friday in my organization, the teachers fill in an online questionnaire. Every single week. So we've got lots of data on the quality and impact of our CPD. And actually, the last question goes, what impact will this session have on your practice? Just to get them thinking about that as well. We tie the student survey with what we teach in CPD. So we know from the students whether it's having impact or not. We interview teachers to find out more about the detail of what they want and what they think. We do learning walks. I can't spend a lot of time on it, but this is basically the whole organization looking at one aspect of teaching and learning, doing a massive exercise in looking at one aspect, observing every single lesson, and saying, okay, we're really making progress in this. These are the areas that we need to improve. So you understand whether that teacher development is having an impact or not. And of course, do not underestimate the importance of the watercooler moment. That's when I get my best feedback from teachers. Off guard. If you want to find out more, here it is. And I'm going to be kicked out, so I'm not going to focus on the last bit. I don't know what happened with my timing. Really apologies. So I don't know if you want to, this is, are we uploading this? No? We are uploading this. So you can have a look at this later. It's quite interesting. It's stuff by David Weston on how to make it happen on impact, okay? So, it wasn't a charismatic performance, but I hope you got a bit of inspiration to inspire your teachers in their professional development. So, thank you very much.